So good afternoon, everyone. I think it's 2 o'clock and I wish you all very welcome to this session, Building Resilience and Fostering Innovation and Handling Disruption. My name is Haakon Thue Lie. I'm an IP management consultant with Dehns and I work in our new Oslo office. I'm also an associate professor in technology management and in IP at NTNU in Trondheim. And with me today is a great panel of experts that I will introduce shortly. And you can also see them on the screen. We have a question and answering process because I hope you have questions during our discussion that we can bring into the discussion. And then please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to submit any questions during the discussion. And then we will have a session at the end as well. And we will also have be sure that any questions won't go away. We will answer them by email if you feel that they are not being addressed during the event. But then also please include the name of the person, the speaker that you are addressing your question to, if it's particular to one person. So I think you will manage that great. And then also we start this session with going into a report that we have made recently, a research report that addresses some of these questions on how IP is a strategy for and a tool for fostering innovation and creating resilience. So I will enter into some of the findings we have that are sort of the background for this discussion, because when we try to figure out how we can contribute to a discussion on innovation and on sustainability and so on, we found that the work we did on the report was interesting. So I'll bring some of those results over to you now. So this report has the title Resilience and Innovation, and we look into how intellectual property intensive firms have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, and there are just two words I like to point out, that resilience in Norwegian, that's motstandskraft, and you have the word kraft in there. And also the big theme for Oslo Innovation Week has been sustainability, and that is bærekraft. And we have this word in Norwegian, kraft, which is of course power. So this is about, you know, the powers that inflect innovation and the development of society. And it's really that perspective that we will have our panel discussion. So we sent out a survey. We created a survey with lots of interesting questions that we sent out to Dehns clients and also some others in late spring this year, when the pandemic, you know, had been there for a year. And the topic was really how intellectual property intensive firms have responded and how they adapted to the pandemic. And what we saw was really that, of course, the pandemic had affected the majority of the innovative businesses. And this has been confirmed also. We have data from the EU IPO, for example, that shows a huge dip early in the spring, and then things settle a little bit, and then things go up again and come back to the normal. So this is something we have seen on a macro level. But what we really got here was answers, you know, some small details, interesting things from firms and universities that are engaged in innovation. And they could also tell us that their R&D programs were affected because there were lots of course, thinking about how should we address the pandemic, and strangely enough, we also saw that a lot of responses on collaboration opportunities were diminished. And that was a little bit opposed to what we could see from the research literature, which sort of said that it would be much smarter and one would probably see much more collaboration in order to overcome all the troubles with the pandemic. And then we saw generally that the firms reported back that funding remained quite stable, but in some areas you would see a reduction. And most businesses really kept their IP strategy the same. They didn't change during the pandemic. Some of the businesses, they started innovating in new areas, and this is something I think we will come back to during the panel discussion, because of course in life sciences and in health and so on, we've seen lots of new innovative activities, but another thing we saw on collaboration was really that, and this, you know, all this panel debate illustrates it, because we are not meeting physically in Oslo, but we are doing everything via Zoom and all the new tools that we have learned to, or been forced to adapt to. But that not only goes for the video, but it's also new working practices, and these new practices of working will stay. So this is collaboration, which is one of the themes that we will discuss. And there was also a definitive optimism in the responses, and a view that R&D and innovation would normalize quickly. And that is what we see from also the aggregated data from the EU IPO and so on, is that it has started to normalize. And this, of course, affected discussion on funding, which we will spend some time on during the panel discussion. So what we also got as a feedback is that intellectual property is a tool to protect and grow innovative businesses. So this didn't change, and investments in IP did not contract during the pandemic period. And this probably has something to do with resilience, that the firms and the universities saw intellectual property as a foundation for a strong recovery. And then again, we got reports that they would probably expand their portfolios of intellectual property to protect against future crises. So these are interesting findings. So all in all, this is a 1939 board from the British government in the beginning of the war. But I think the slogan is quite well known: keep calm and carry on, and that is, I think, summarizes what we've seen from the responses of the firms. The report will be emailed to all of those that has registered, and will of course be available on our web pages and so on. So it has all these interesting small details, and I must also say it's been a privilege to work with this, because it has enabled us to not only, you know, do marketing research and try to figure out in what does our clients need and think, but also to put this into a larger context. That's how innovation will help society, and how the type of technology development and investments and so on that's circles around intellectual property, how that creates resilience and innovation in or contributes to resilience and innovation in society. So I think that's the main findings from the report, and I think then we will go into the panel discussion. So I would like to introduce our panel, and then hopefully the panel will turn their cameras on. And there you are. So we have a great panel that covers, as you will see, the aspects like Masha Strømme, who's a life science investor from PAACS Invest. And so that sort of represents one part of the funding issue. And then we have Felipe Aguillera Børresen from Innovation Norway, where he's a senior IP advisor. So Felipe knows lots and lots about intellectual property, but he's also from Innovation Norway that is important for public funding of innovation during the pandemic crisis. We have Ole Kristian Hjelstuen, who's the CEO from Inventur. Inventur is the tech transfer office of Oslo University. So we then have also the point of views from the academic, from the university side, and how universities play a role in the questions around innovation and resilience. We have Ole Solesvik, who's a business developer with Alip, but it was an incubator but also he's the CEO of Grind DX. Did I say that right, Ove? Yes. And so he's in this position of being both involved with Alip and forming a new company in the middle of or at the end of the pandemic, which is very interesting. And then we have Deborah Owen, who's a partner with Dehns, who advise clients on IP in life sciences. So she's a nitty-gritty expert on patenting, but also have a great view of innovation in life sciences. So I think we should start off with the topic of funding. And I know that you have some views on that, Masha. Are you?
Yes, thank you very much.
That's what you do for a living.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thank you, Haakon. It's great to be here today. Thank you, everyone. No, absolutely. And I think the issue of financing throughout the pandemic, or when at the beginning of it, was definitely a huge concern for some of our portfolio companies. But surprisingly, we were quite surprised to see that funding continued to happen. One of our portfolio companies was actually able to raise approximately 150 million kroners with only digital meetings. So Zoom, Teams, that's it. There was not one face-to-face sitting across the table, which I had never experienced before. So that was quite amazing to see. The other thing about financing, which I think it's important to bring to the table, is the fact that because it was so much, the pandemic is so much linked to our health, it has actually stimulated more financing coming from people and groups that had never been involved in healthcare before. So we've seen some of the VC funds raise much bigger funds than before. I think it was Gilde or Forbion actually, that basically said that they raised close to $1 billion in 2020. And that was the biggest ever, funding that they've ever managed. So I think overall the environment has been quite positive when it comes to financing. And again, I have to say I come from the position of healthcare. So yeah, from that point of view, definitely a lot of positive momentum.
I think that's very interesting, and it confirms the sort of positive view, and also that you see that people have entered into investing into this area.
Yeah, I think I could just add a couple more things. I mean, all of us are now very, we know about mRNA. We've people who had never heard about RNA before now know, mRNA vaccines. And I just want to bring this to everyone's attention, because it took 20 years, more than 20 years, for RNA to actually become a product on the market. But when the pandemic started, it was within months that we were able to catalyze, get billions of dollars from government and from private sources in order to really push this innovation through and get the vaccines on the market. I think that was a remarkable achievement and something we've never seen, before. I heard I think it's last month, the Biden administration announced that because of what they saw through the development of the vaccine, they're actually going to start something called ARPA-H, which is a new fund based on what they've done with DARPA, so the Defense Agency funding body, to actually help stimulate precision personalized health. And they're putting quite a lot of money aside to basically stimulate innovation in the field. And this is, again, because of what they've seen on the development of the vaccine. So I just thought I'd share that information.
Yeah, that was interesting because it sort of triggers my my background is really telecoms and that kind of technology, and the internet that we are working on now, that was triggered by the Cold War, and then again it was called DARPANET or ARPANET in the beginning, and now you see that this crisis then again it might bring some new ways of thinking about innovation and for the public really or government to act, and that's a very neat cue to Felipe. Felipe, because you work with the public funding.
Yes, definitely. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here today. I wanted to give you a picture of our experiences with the funding during the pandemic. So what we saw at the beginning was that there was a slowdown. So there was a decrease in the total amount of applications to Innovation Norway regarding innovation projects. And this was due to maybe to the initial panic, companies tending to stick to their core businesses, reducing costs to weather the storm, if you will. But then after the summer 2020, we saw a significant increase in the amount of applications. So by 2020, we saw a doubling of the total amount of grants and loans to a record all-time high of 20 billion Norwegian kroners. And we increased the amount of specific cases or projects that we funded by 80% compared to 2019. So, and in addition, we took more risk, mainly by lowering the claims of financial feasibility and by increasing the coverage, the degree of coverage. So, but 2020 has been challenging, also when it comes to financing in some ways. So especially for young companies, we've seen that some of them are experienced challenges like investors pulling back from ongoing negotiations, for instance. But this seems to be, and this seems to be confirmed by the numbers from Innovation Norway. And there is specifically one that says that, I mean, in 2019, one Innovation Norway kroner unleashed or triggered 1.7 kroners from private capital. That same number in 2020 is actually 1.5, so it decreased. But at the same time, we see that companies in ICT or green tech with what you can call sustainable solutions, they have less trouble or have had less trouble, maybe also in medtech, in raising capital. So one example is the company Freyr, who managed to raise, I believe it was 7 billion Norwegian crowns to build and upscale the battery production facilities in Mo i Rana. So this could be because, I mean, those investments are seen as less risky compared to, let's say, oil and gas or other types of industries.
That's an interesting point, and I guess the 1.7, was it going down to 1.5 also could have to do with Innovation Norway being more into risky projects, taking more risk simply, but Masha had a point when she talked about how quickly you saw new innovation, and you mentioned when we discussed previously, you mentioned trust as an very important factor as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's important to mention. So when I say managing fundraisings digitally, a lot of the relationships were established from before, and or it was one removed, so it wasn't a completely blank sheet of paper cold calling. So I think the historical trust was a key component to managing to do the fundraisings. And to Felipe's point, I would also like to add that the stimulation from Innovation Norge, from the Norwegian Research Council, really also fueled the funding from private investors, family offices, institutions. It really helped catalyze this forward.
Do you think that was a kind of, Norwegians tend to trust our government, so we don't worry so much, or we as we think it the government will be there to help and assist in anything from funding to conflicts on wages or whatever it should be. But did you, as a private investor, I guess you co-invest a lot with Innovation Norway and other public bodies. Did you build on that trust?
Definitely. There was definitely building on that trust, building on those relationships with the various parts of the government. I mean, Innovation Norge, the Norwegian Research Council, Investinor are parties that we work with, and definitely the relationships being established between the different parties are very important. I would say that in healthcare, it also is interesting to see, facing your own mortality, you have people who have come out of the woodworks. You have retail investors who had never invested in biotech who suddenly wanted to be part of it. And the flip side, from the other angle, the companies that we have been involved with, a lot of them very early on, opportunistically decided to see whether they could do something for the pandemic, whether they could readapt their technology so that it works against COVID-19. So they started to be, I think it was a little bit of both, facing mortality plus being opportunistic because of the funding availability. But nonetheless, there was a bit of that going on as well.
Mm. Ole Kristian, you're in the very early stage of innovation, and we talked a bit about the pre-seed funding and how you see that developed during the pandemic.
Sure. Well, thank you for letting me on, and thank you for inviting me. Hello, everybody. We saw during the pandemic we thought there would be an immediate lockdown. Labs were closed and projects will stop overnight. We spent a lot of time replanning, so strengthening the arms that could go and go on as they could, and maybe advance those arms, and then waiting for the labs to open and get the other work done. But actually, very quickly, labs were opened, more innovation came in, and we were able to progress projects, not only from the university, but from the university hospitals and the other hospitals as well. And when it comes to funding, we of course are concerned, but on a general level, coinciding with the pandemic, that the pre-seed funding that is in the very, very early stage has moved from Innovation Norway and then close to the projects, to the new started companies, and into Investinor with another set of criteria that actually those will be more like seed funds and leaving a gap on pre-seed funding. And of course, we are still concerned about that. What we actually saw, though, is kind of like there were other funding sources. People were interested in doing a contribution. Crowdfunding was an opportunity that was more, at least for some of our projects, and companies were a source of funding. And I can't really say that one is eliminating the other, but they're not 1 + 1 is 3 in a way. So maybe the crowdfunding, other sources, people wanting to contribute. What Masha says also, there were companies, there were family investors, angel investors that were investing during the pandemic actually, so it compensated for the lack of the pre-seed fund.
That's interesting to see. I mean, you do have these large public actors where the university system is, of course, one huge driving force for innovation in Norway, and then you have all the bodies for that funds innovation, like Innovation Norway and the Research Council and so on. So you get money and funding into the research, but Ove, you have been you've been on sort of, I guess, both sides here. You're in a leap where you're sort of part of the system that tries to help and encourage people to start and run their own companies, and then you also, I guess, you have been looking for funding and trying to set up your new company.
Absolutely. Hello everybody, and thank you for having me here. But that's correct. I am part of ELIP, which is the largest health incubator in the Nordics. So we have like 50 startup companies here at all times. And of course, when the pandemic hit, there was some kind of a panic mode. I think everybody went into panic. But I think we quickly saw people moving in the direction of how can we help with the pandemic? How can we use our technology, our startup technology, and do something that are related to handling the pandemic, from new tests to rapid testing to how to develop new drugs or vaccines. So there were a lot of activities quite quickly moving in that direction. But then I think after the first half year, we did see that most companies went forward with their main activities. They focused on their IP, they focused on their business. They had quite a broad network within the health community, the biotech community, from academic to business. So it seems like we had, I think many of them saw the pandemic more, maybe not as a threat, but it created some more opportunities. There were some mega trends already out there, like the mRNA technology, which suddenly moved into reality, which gave a lot of interest for health research as such, and people saw that as a new and a great opportunity, and that combined with other trends like the digital platforms for communication that has started to work already. It was just blooming up and gave new opportunities for reaching out, and also, as we have mentioned here, the emergence of crowdfunding, which opened up a new window. We did see that Research Council and Innovation Norway increased their funding schemes. There were more money available for research, but at the same time, they were also a bottleneck because there were so many people now looking for getting into those kind of grants, and the lead time was quite long, and many of our companies at ELIP struggled getting attention quickly enough. And I think that also forced some of them into looking for other ways to reach funding. And crowdfunding has really been interesting here. We see now that some of the crowdfunding companies that are organizing this have doubled their activity last year.
I guess, Felipe, that you really felt this. I mean, it's not good to be a bottleneck, but it's but it's hard to sort of I guess expand the fair bureaucracy that you need to have around these investments. And how did you feel it working in Innovation Norway when you sort of got all the Ove and his clones coming for money from you? Oh, you're muted, Felipe. Thanks.
There we are. Well, of course, it was overwhelming for us all, the pandemic, the initial phase, but we all adapted. And like companies, we did also adapt. What we, I mean, we had to deal with doubling the amount of grants that we have to handle with about the same amount of people. So we had to digitalize, and we have to find better ways to deliver. But we did manage to deliver, and we're still sort of doing so. But we're still in a digitalization, let's say, journey in order to meet the needs of the companies and be more efficient in the way we communicate with companies. So we are aware that we had to concentrate on the financing part, and maybe it was not as easy to contact us during those times, but it changes now, and we're certainly there to discuss the projects and of course to finance them still now. And I wanted to make a couple of points regarding financing and IP, especially because what we see from an IP perspective is that some of the delays caused by the pandemic and the innovation projects may result in challenges for smaller companies regarding financing their IP portfolios, especially patents with the rigid milestones and costs. So we might see some companies struggling with that. Secondly, for larger companies, and especially those who have become, well, global players in different technology fields, we expect a rise in IP-related conflicts, like the current one we're seeing between AutoStore, the Norwegian company, and Ocado, the British company, with lawsuits in Britain and the US regarding their automated storage technologies. So those are two of the trends that we might see crystallizing in the near future.
That was very good, Felipe, because those were almost the questions I had. We're going to ask Debs about. Have you seen this that with the clients that you work with, that has something been lost, like, you know, clients not being able to go into PCT or file as many national phases as they wanted, and so on? And do you think the conflicts will be more conflicts from all of this?
Hi everyone. I don't think we've really seen much from the conflict point of view. I mean, obviously, when the pandemic started, we were hugely concerned for our clients and how they would manage. And I think, as from your introduction, obviously, I'm very much focused on the healthcare sector as well. So a lot of my clients are very dependent on getting into the labs. And of course, the first thing that happened was everything shut down, and what on earth would happen? We were concerned. But I would say, by and large, although there was a lag with some of the projects while the labs were shut, we've been amazed how well our clients have adapted, and we haven't seen, for example, I take Felipe's point about how expensive sort of filings are, but if we look at our sort of filing numbers, a lot of our clients are obviously SMEs, university based, and our filing numbers year on year for new innovations have really held up pretty well, and we haven't seen a real drop off at all, which is massively encouraging and good news for obviously the companies and the entities concerned. So that's quite a surprise, really, and I can only hope that that means that the funding is holding up pretty well as well. I mean, just from a UK perspective as well, I think, and I'd be interested in perhaps Masha's views on this, I think there is a sense that smaller companies are perhaps struggling a bit more for funding and to get sort of seen and noticed. And it seems that may be a bit reflected in some of the views we've had here, but I do think there is a potential issue going forward there with whether sort of particularly private investment will sort of come into those smaller early stage companies, and whether that might be a problem sort of more going forward.
Well, I think, so Ulla Kristian also said, you know, very early stage financing is difficult, and I completely agree. We struggle in Norway more than in other countries because typically the VCs, life sciences, again, I have to say, this is life sciences perspective. If they have a mandate to invest in Europe, they typically only have about 20% that can be done outside Europe, and Norway, Switzerland, now UK, and US, Australia are considered outside Europe. So we compete against geographies that are so well equipped for life sciences that it's really hard to attract financing into Norway for these private early stage companies. I spent a lot of time, you know, trying to match our companies with, you know, the vision, the mission that they have, or the indication that they're in, to basically the specific mandates of funds outside. So to really make sure that we don't go, you know, shotgun, but we actually go very specific to people who are like-minded and have the same vision and mission. I find that we have better dialogues when we do it that way. So really targeted dialogues, but it's not easy, definitely not.
I think we could start to move over to the area of collaboration. Is that something, Masha? You mentioned we discussed, you know, digital platforms and interaction and trust and so on, and here we are, you know, trying to discuss digitally, and it takes some time before you start to interrupt one another here and
Yes, I'm happy to interrupt you, Haakon. I completely,
yeah.
I think
I want you to interrupt me, but it takes some trust, you know, and to do that.
No, and I, again, you know, someone was telling me the other day that, you know, basically most 70% of communication is nonverbal. And when we look at ourselves here, you know, we only see, you know, our faces, our heads, and can't really read the body language. It is difficult. I think it's fine for presentations when you actually have one person downloading information to an audience. But when it comes to interactive exchanges, discussions, debate, it is harder. And you have a tough job today, Haakon, managing a panel. But, you know, it's great that we have these possibilities, but nothing replaces the face-to-face. I think we need that every once in a while.
Yeah. I really agree, but I think it has opened, you know, a new world of possibilities, because it's much more accepted, as you mentioned earlier, that it's not only your friends you can bring in, but you can refer to somebody, and you can have somebody from another country very easily into a meeting, which might have been harder before. And also this type of hybrid meetings, that's much more accepted, that you are a group of people and working together. But yeah.
No, and I think just before I let others talk, I think also just we are much more efficient actually through these digital meetings. We get a lot more done. Well, from my point of view, we get a lot more done in a day, being able to just hop on Teams or Zoom and have these discussions, a whole group of us from different countries. It makes a big difference. We don't have to get on a plane and meet physically every time.
How do you think about that, Felipe? We discussed our...
Well, I just to build on Masha's points here. I mean, and the impact varied depending on where the company was actually, and what we see is that everyone went to a shock digitalization during the pandemic. But for some, it was not problematic. I mean, especially for those that had already established a relationship, as Masha mentions, and just to cater them through video links, not a big problem. But for others, it was more challenging, especially for those trying to expand their markets, build new relationships, and needing to establish new relations and networks and suppliers and so on. That was challenging. And I mean, talking about digitalization, some companies have not only become more digital during the pandemic, or even before, but they have gone through a digital transformation. So we have, I just wanted to bring the point of the unicorns that we have now in Norway. They were not here, and they're here now, and they appeared during the pandemic. So it's companies with a valuation of more than $1 billion, and we can count, depending on the how we count them, but well, Gelato, AutoStore, Kahoot, Cognite, Oda can be counted among them. So they have in common a digitally driven efficiency in different fields. So in education,
and you think about them as they're sort of building their platforms or ecosystems that depend on a lot of other companies, and that perhaps gets
yes, at least some of them do. But it is difficult to say whether the pandemic, when it had an influence for these companies regarding becoming, digital or unicorns. But the way these companies reacted to the pandemic may have played a role. And if I may share an example, there is a beautiful example of a Norwegian company. It is Gelato, that some of you might know of, and it's a print-on-demand software company connecting, well, a network of printers globally. And I talked to one of the co-founders, Paul Ness, and I asked him how did they manage to attract investors during the pandemic. Were they not affected by the pandemic at all? They managed to raise $240 million from inside partners, and it was actually their first investment in Norway, and from SoftBank. And they have in their portfolio, well, as you know, Shutterstock and Twitter and Shopify and others. And so the question was, how did they manage it? Were they not affected by the pandemic? And what he says is that that was far from the truth. They were very affected by the pandemic. So actually, when March came in 2020, they saw their customer base disappear. In the personal segment, nobody was sending invitations or to weddings or celebrations and so on. On the corporate side, nobody was sending brochures and material to their subsidiaries. So everything disappeared. So what they do was that they moved towards new segments, and they addressed one interesting segment that appeared during the pandemic, which was namely the home improvement segment. That was actually apparently a global trend. So they moved towards printing in aluminum, acrylic, and other kinds of materials to cater to that sort of need. And secondly, they moved towards, or they decided to open their platform to competitors. So they made their APIs available for others. They opened a whole new market for their software, strengthening their platform and creating, most importantly, a revenue stream with very low costs. So when countries like Italia closed their borders, Gelato was there to cater with a resilient distribution network and that could attend the needs. So I think that's a very interesting example of how a company coped and thrived during the pandemic.
Yeah, they have a great trademark for being in Italy as well, Gelato. But it's very interesting what you pointed at, that this is not a healthcare COVID-related business at all, but that they are able to change, and that they actually opened up for collaboration. So that's really interesting. Have you, Ole Kristian, seen researchers collaborating a lot more and then creating new ideas that you can run through Invento? Or
well, at least we've seen that there's been an increase in the number of ideas just after the lockdown, and a couple of months later, we thought there would be a lack of new ideas because scientists were not accessing their labs and doing the research that they used to. But actually, we saw the opposite. And I think there is, it could be the disruption as such that actually makes people think other thoughts. And I think scientists as such are creative people, and they respond to this disruption. But then also I think there's another bigger picture, and there was already in Norway a move towards more entrepreneurship, slowly, gradually. And I think during the pandemic, it was almost like people were taking this, the challenge, the challenges, not maybe only on the pandemic and bringing vaccines, new solutions to the market and to the people, but also on sustainability, that this is now, I want to give my personal contribution. We talked about this happening to investors. I think it happened, that's a fraction also of why there was an increase in the number of ideas. I want to contribute, I can do it, I should do it, because I'm a scientist, and then it ends into more ideas. I think.
Is this what you feel you're doing, Ove, when you start a new?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Ole Kristian just told us is the same that we've seen in the leap when it comes to new companies. We had some, as I said, a panic mode in the beginning, and not so many new companies. But after half a year, we had a boom of new companies coming in, applying to be part of a leap. So newly founded companies with quite high standard, I would say, clever people, dedicated people with some purpose. They wanted to contribute with something meaningful. So we actually had an increase in a number of new companies to the incubator. And today, actually, we are planning to expand our facility, because we see there's a blooming number coming here. Another issue, going a little bit down in the details, we focus quite a lot on interaction and collaboration between the companies that are within the incubator. Having 50 to 70 companies, of course, there are many ways to collaborate, and that's one of the kind of benefits of being at a leap, that you are on the same floor together with all these entrepreneurs. And when the pandemic came and we had to close down, or some of that disappeared, and we started and worked hard to have a digital platform so they could keep up some of these interactions. But that is something that actually you can't manage that by Zoom or Teams. You can't meet for a coffee. You can't have that interaction, the body language and the jokes and all these things. So that is really something that all the entrepreneurs at the Leap have missed. And we have this kind of euphoria now when we're opening up again, and they can come back and they can sit down, they can talk, they have coffee, and start find these synergistic collaborations.
Yeah. Have you, Deb, seen when people collaborate more? Have you seen any more, joint patent applications? Or I mean, as patent attorneys, we usually like people to not own things together, but do we see more conflicts or more discussions on who invented what and so on? Because the patent system sort of is created for one inventor working for one company making one invention, and people start to collaborate, and it all gets different.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we do see a lot of collaborative projects, and I think that's always been the case, particularly with universities working with other companies as well. And so those discussions about inventorship and ownership are very, very familiar, and it does really illustrate the importance of having good collaborations between the parties, because ironing all that stuff out at the beginning, having a good collaboration agreement, making sure that both, all the parties to the piece are really aware of what they're going to get out of it, and have that all set up front without any hidden surprises is really important. And I think that's where, to touch on the sort of the video calls, the sort of the meetings by Zoom and everything, that's something that I think has been quite a revelation. We've really seen our clients embrace that. I mean, I'm really looking forward to getting back to a more normal hybrid system where we can take the best bits out of the video meetings and still have some face-to-face. I haven't been to Norway for so long. I haven't even been to see my new Norwegian colleagues. This is not good. So we need to get back to that. But I think what it has done is really meant that because our clients have embraced the video meeting so much, we've actually been able to have more collaboration with them than we might otherwise, because it's so quick, it's convenient. I think, as Masha said, we're not getting on a plane. And whereas we always had lots of contact with our clients over the phone, I would say with a lot of them, we've had even more. And that's been a much better kind of collaborative experience. And I don't think that will change. I really think going forward, we will use this as a positive and find a really good hybrid. There will always be times when face-to-face is better, but I think, we've learned a lot over the last 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah. I really think it's a steep learning curve. I think we have to move on to the next area for discussion, which is really, innovation and IP strategy. We've been touching onto that, but we also created a small poll for all of those who are watching us, and it's a very tricky question. Does sustainability depend on innovation? So, and you have only you can only answer yes or no, so you have to think about that. Is innovation really needed for sustainability, or isn't it? And so while we get the vote there, I was only do I see the answers running in? That will be interesting. We'll have the results in a short while. But I thought when we tried to drag these topics, now we talked about funding and we talked about collaborations, and then we're going to drag this into how we think about innovation and IP strategy, and that means the sort of long-term planning and thinking how we will position ourselves, and then we've seen the answers from in the report, in the research report that we made, that no, people are not actually going to change their IP strategy. They're going to continue, and they might even increase their IP portfolio, and then we start to think about how will intellectual property on one hand give you something that creates resilience, and on the other hand there was a point for what Debs mentioned on how when people start to collaborate, they also need to be clear about who actually owns what. And there's a great research paper from Norwegian researchers at BI, Olaisen and Revang, who looks into projects in the North Sea, and where they see that talking about intellectual property, that forms a sort of understanding about who will take care of what part of the knowledge and how can they best use it forward as the innovation process runs along with different parties coming and going. But Felipe, what do you think about foreign investments in Norway? Because that's also something we've seen, that when foreign companies invest in Norway, they tend to or it will create more or better IP management, and that might again come from that they need this tool to, you know, secure their innovation or secure the process more than people who perhaps know very well the people. So there's this balance between trust and how investors will invest in companies in Norway. Do you?
Yes, I mean, we've seen, and there are some numbers that I can share with you about how companies have reacted and used IP during and after the pandemic. But I wanted to mention first something that is definitely related, and that is how companies have reacted, which strategies have companies adopted in Norway to the pandemic. That was a question that we really wanted to answer, and to do so, we asked for the help of researchers from NTNU and Nord Universitet with data sets from Innovation Norway's applicants, from the national registry, SkatteFUNN, and so on. And the study, just to summarize the findings, finds out that there are 4 different strategies that companies adopted. The first one is, I mean, there were the companies that were not much affected by the crisis, and they continued a bit business as usual, keep calm, carry on, as you said. And then there were the ones that were reactive, or the ones that adapted to the situation by reducing expenses, reducing staff, furloughs, with the goal mainly to, you know, weather the storm, to survive and bounce back to normal after the crisis. And then there was a third group, a very interesting group of companies that used the pandemic in a proactive manner. So these companies used the crisis as, well, an opportunity, and they were forced to do so, to innovate, to find new markets, new business models, and so on. And these companies tend to bounce forward, or meaning that they used the crisis to end up in a better competitive position than before. And example that I brought before, the gelato, could be one of those. And then we have a group that comprised companies that in some way combined those two. So the big question is, I mean, which strategy was the best one? And it is too early to say which one was the best, but there are, and this certainly depends on the industry, on what kind of funding sources you find, as my colleagues here are mentioning. But there are indications that companies that follow the more proactive approach have ended up in a stronger position. So that's sort of a summary of those findings, companies adapting different strategies to the pandemic.
Those are interesting findings, and I wonder, really, Kristian, how you see that from a university perspective. Is it like, you know, would scientists have these considerations and then get innovation into the market, or?
Absolutely. I think, well, we saw that during the pandemic, at least 3 of the 4 first vaccines coming onto the market, and actually was the first step to stop the pandemic, were university-based IP that were then taken, licensed by companies and taken into production and made available. And then, of course, the discussion of patent rights, of course, and etc. is another thing. But I think that shows that it's really important that scientists are working on their research. It's really important that they also protect it, and I think what we're doing is unchanged during the pandemic. The strategy of patenting at the right time and with the right extent went on as normal. It's actually more influenced by the funding sources. So if we have funding as a project from the Research Council, we might carry on the de-risking and delaying the patenting as long as we dare. If there's pre-seed funding, if there's private money available, we might start up a company early and then file earlier. So.
Can I just ask a question, Ulla, Kristian, and Felipe? In the UK, they have the patent box. So this is very encouraging for investors to go, into companies early stage. What's your view, and what can we do to actually help Norway, perhaps develop a similar strategy, if I may?
Yeah, well, I mean, who actually made that strategy is the first question. So the patent box strategy, who would make that happen in Norway? I think we should start there and see whether or not that's an adaptable strategy. We're not as advanced as the UK, of course, so that might come into play.
The patent box is a system, just for our viewers to understand, that where if you have patents on an innovation, you will get a tax deduction on the royalty stream that's created from that invention. And different countries have different systems around that. And the problem, while Norway probably haven't, or it was discussed some time ago, but an issue with these systems, that's you are rewarding innovation that's already taken place. So you sort of don't really encourage new innovation, and then it gets a question for the government whether that's a good way or not to encourage more innovation. On the other hand, if you want more investments, then you should look into schemes like that. So it's a tricky balancing act. I don't know if you.
Yeah, if I may comment on that, it's very interesting, and we surely looking constantly at mechanisms that could work. A risk with these incentive mechanisms is if we look at China, what happened there was that they have very strong stimuli for companies and investors to build patent portfolios around technologies, and that ended up by making China now the first country in the world in patent filings. But we saw that the quality of those patents being delivered was not very big, and it was not actually fostering or promoting innovation. So there's a tricky side to the incentives that I don't think anyone has really cracked, but certainly learning about the experiences that you have in England, it would be interesting to learn more about that, of course.
Yeah, sorry, it was just a practical thing because we're now at 3 o'clock and we'll be running for 15 minutes over time because we're into so many interesting things. So at 15:15 we close down.
May I just add one more point? Because I mean, if we look at how the companies reacted to the pandemic in Norway and abroad, we saw that during the pandemic, there were some tendencies regarding the usage of IP. So if we look at the World Intellectual Property Organization, we see that some international applications continue to grow, while others diminished. So patents, and let me just say the number here, yeah, patents grew by 4%, and we see that China was stood out because they grew by 16%. Trademarks, a bit slower, but almost the same, 0.6. And then designs registrations were hit hard. They diminished by 15% globally, international design registrations. And regarding Norway, I talked to the Norwegian Intellectual Property Office last week to learn about possible trends and that we could see in the registrations from last year. And they shared with me that there were no significant changes in the registration activity for patents, trademarks, and designs. So, and regarding companies from Innovation Norway, we measure every year the usage of IP mechanisms, not only patents, trademarks, and designs, but the usage of trade secrets, of know-how, NDAs, and so on. And we see that consistently, startups are much better users of the system than companies, larger companies. So this is not only the usage, but the intention of usage. So that's sort of a dual question.
So it's really like a strategic decision, or perhaps they have more focus on strategy as an upstart.
Perhaps they're building the strategy and they're building IP into that. Yes, that could be one of the reasons.
Are you doing that?
And then we see, yeah.
Yeah, I just interrupt you because
yeah, of course.
I want to hear if Uwe is doing that. he's starting up a new company, and do you really strategically think about? I mean, then you really have lots of things to think about. How much do you think about?
Well, it's both for the companies that we have in the LEAP, in the health incubator. We see an increased focus on IP, not only patents, but a whole IP strategy. Early on, they're focusing quite a lot on securing their IP, make sure that it's protected as well as it can. And there are different ways to do that, of course. And the main focus of these early startups are that they need this to attract investors. So and sometimes even though the patent may not be, the patent application may not be the strongest, still they see the value because it's perceived as a value, and they need it to get the attention from investors going on. And for my company, which is an early stage cancer diagnostic company, where I collaborate with people in Israel and Canada, we have a very focus on the IP. We have IP components from Canada, from Israel, and from Norway, and build this into one company. And we really need to protect it from the outside world, from competition, but also to make sure that we organize ourselves and the inventors in a proper manner. So people feel they're in the same boat, and we don't create any potential conflicts and so on. But yes.
You think
very interesting insight from Uwe, because we do see that reflected in also in our statistics, because I mean we see that Norwegian companies who have some degree of international collaboration or especially ownership, they have a tendency to be better users in intention and action of the different IP mechanisms. And regarding collaboration, we see, among other financial instruments, that it is the collaboration schemes called innovation contracts where the usage of IP mechanisms score highest. And we're not talking only about patenting, as I mentioned before, but trademark designs, NDAs, and so on. So there is sort of a big specter of different rights. So we see that the need for collaboration and competition with international players has not decreased as a result of the pandemics. Rather, it has forced companies to do this in better ways. And we see that IP plays definitely an important role in building a competitive advantage for the companies.
I think you mentioned, Masha, that European investors would have, like 80% had to go to the EU countries, and then they had 20% of their funding left for others, and then they could sort of choose between Switzerland and Norway, and then Switzerland would win most of the money. Is this related to the IP situation, or?
No, this would be healthcare. So that's why my comment was very specifically linked to the fact that there's such an established healthcare industry in countries like Switzerland, in countries like the UK, that it will be a more natural fit to go there if you have 20% of your fund that will look for healthcare investments outside the EU. So that's why Norway, unfortunately, falls to the side for some of these funds. But I think, again, it takes a bit of work, but I think we can get there. There's fantastic technology and innovation happening here. So there's no reason why we can't change that. Yeah, just one point on IP, if I may, because it's been such a critical part of the vaccine. And I'd love to hear what people have thought of when the comments or the question was, could we lift the IP for a couple of years from the vaccine, manufacturers, producers, in order to make it available to everyone? And you had all the pharma companies getting together and writing letters left, right, and center and saying, absolutely not. This is not the way to take things forward. Trade secrets, to your point, Felipe, there's a lot more in the arsenal of protection than just patents. I suspect we're all on the same page, but I'd just love to hear if we are. So thoughts?
Please, anyone who gets triggered by Masha's question.
I just want to make a short comment, because it is a complex problem that does not have an easy solution. So I don't think the patent waiver is a sustainable solution. And the reason is double. First, because we have to find a better system, and we have to take a systemic approach to this and not only target patents. Because firstly, the patents and what is written on a patent is just a part of what is needed to reproduce and to distribute the pharmaceuticals. So you need the complementary assets, you need the know-how, the trademarks, as you said, Masha, as well, to and the trade secrets to be able to reproduce and reach the people needing the vaccines. So just the waiver, I don't think it's a solution. Secondly, the system that we have is built on incentives for the pharmaceutical companies. So they invest because they see a return on their investments on the other side. So if you take that incentive, that may lead to trouble in the next pandemic. So we have to think about a sustainable solution that allows and that ensures that we have the innovation and the incentives and that we reach the people that need the vaccines.
Yes, no, exactly. And I think that's really important because I think obviously the message that came across was, you know, the mean pharma players who are not sharing their vaccine, but actually there is an investment that was made. I think there could be, you know, maybe other tools that can be used, pricing, for example. But Ola, Kristian, I'll let you speak.
No, I think so too. I think pricing is very relevant because this is more of a political solution to an issue than actually letting it all free and having backyard manufacturers starts making the same drug and the same vaccine that you might not actually want to take wherever you are in the world. But I think actually I think it's a good point to mention in this context, though, that I think the trust from the Norwegian scientists and for Norwegians as such in the industry has actually become better during the pandemic, and seeing that it is kind of like a relay. Academics should be the source, and they should always dig further, and then the industry plays a role in taking this to the market and setting it into production, and then of course governments or you as a private person has to buy that back. And of course, there's always been this kind of cultural thing, I think, in Norway, which is a bit stronger than in other nations, which actually influences the number of ideas and the IP we're generating, I think, against the industry. But I think that has actually become better during the pandemic.
We have to start thinking about closing our discussion, unfortunately. And
I think just one comment, if I may.
Yes, please.
To the patent and releasing the restrictions. I think we have to admit that even though there has been major goals met by the development of the vaccines now, I think we have as a larger community, we have failed in protecting the world. And there is a big gap between what we managed to, how we protect ourselves and the rest of the world. And we have to lift, I think, every stone to see how can that be handled in a better way. And maybe the patent issue is one of several, pricing and other incentives. But I wouldn't say that we should just say, no, you can't touch the patent system. We need to look really carefully into this.
There's really coming up a discussion in the World Health Organization about an international treaty on how to prepare for the next crisis, the next situation. And that, of course, includes this question that came up. First, you thought it was okay, a waiver for the patents would solve it, and then they suddenly realized that it's knowledge and trade secret that's really the ingredients here. And as Masha mentioned, the mRNA technology, for example, has been under development for 20 years, and that suddenly can be put in use here. And then the very important question that you brought up over what about spreading these types of innovation to the rest of the world, and how do we achieve that? So I think we have we should have talked for perhaps 1 more hour before we could have come close to a sort of conclusion on resilience and how it connects to innovation. We had a poll where we asked where we asked how innovation and sustainability, whether that was related, and 82% of the respondents, they believed that there was a close connection between innovation and sustainability. And in the same way, I think this term resilience is something that need to be explored and understood better, and what the different parts of that resilience will be, and how we can, and how it affects innovation, and of course, as we are interested in the details of intellectual property and so on, how that plays together with all these other factors. And what I guess we see more and more is that you really need to understand the whole picture. You can't just sit there and understand a small piece of it. And that is what I think has been great with this discussion, and also why I think we at Dehns made a research report and tried to ask a little bit bigger questions and try to understand how it all comes together. So I hope that that you, as in the panel, that you had a bit fun, and as me, learned a lot from having this discussion. And I hope that those of you who have followed our discussion have seen how it flows back and forth with all these interesting things that we could go on for, I think, many more hours. And hopefully we will, because we can now also, write things and discuss in other forums, and I hope that those of you who have sent any questions, that we will be able to ask them, to answer them in emails afterwards. So I just say thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for allowing this great debate to take place. I don't think we disagreed much, but I really think we should continue discussing this, because there's so much to learn. So thank you very much, everybody.